I am so happy that Craig was able to be here and we were able to get him on relatively short notice. I'm excited about this because I know and have known for years of what his experience and what he brings to the opera world is, and I think that you will enjoy this conversation as much as we've enjoyed it having it many times.
We've had a great time preparing, for sure.
So Craig, why don't you, I'm a big person on context, so why don't you tell us a bit about what your relationship with music is and where you come from. Tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm an opera coach and a pianist, accompanist. Some of you may have seen me in recital over the years. Music was indirectly always part of my life. I was born and raised mostly in New Haven, Connecticut. My grandmother, who died 3 years before I was born, was apparently a very, very good pianist. And her brother, my great uncle, who was called Fritzi Keneal, had been a pianist in Malone's Tavern, in New Haven, Connecticut, long before the First World War. And he played for a kid at Yale by the name of Rudy Valley. He also played for two sisters who used to be driven in from Meriden, Connecticut by their father, called the Ponsillo sisters. So he was playing for Rosa and Carmen Poncel particularly before Rosa became famous. He happened to be our next door neighbor, and he started teaching me to play piano and to read music when I was 3 years old. So that's pretty much how it all started. We had, who remembers the Longines Sinfonietta? Oh, hey, Court. Nobody knows it anymore. If you mention the Longines Sinfonietta, none of the kids know. And it was a red plastic recording, and it had Wotan's Farewell on it. And I remember being about 4 years old, listening to it, and sobbing from the beauty of the music, just sobbing. My grandfather ripping the needle off the player, saying, "Schaff die Platte weg, etwas ist mit dem Kind los." Get rid of the recording, something's wrong with the child.
and thus the derangement began.
and that's how it all started. But, it was back in the days when television was still putting on very, very high-class entertainment. And we had the Bell Telephone Hour, of course. We had The Voice of Firestone. We had Ed Sullivan. And, we heard great singing. And I was just fascinated by the sound of the human voice. My grandmother had left behind quite a few 78s of Flagstad. Let's see who else. Swarthout, Björling, and Charles Colban, who was like a fourth cousin down the road or something from New Haven. So I grew up listening to those. And finally, on the Ed Sullivan Show, I remember Jussi Björling and Hilde Guden singing Rigoletto. And just, it was like that scene in, what's the movie where the house is haunted and the little girl gets pulled into the TV set?
Poltergeist.
Poltergeist. I felt like that with Hilde Guden. I just thought,
that dates me a little bit.
This is the most beautiful thing in the world. So that's how it all started. And then eventually my uncle said, well, they need pianists in opera houses. And maybe when you grow up, that's what you can do. And I just settled in on that.
Wow. That's quite a beginning.
Yeah,
actually.
Sure was.
And then so did you begin playing in opera houses, or did you mostly do voice lessons, recitals, that kind of thing, and come up that way? Or?
When I was in high school, I was at Hopkins Grammar School, a very sniffy Tony school up there, and it was a good education. One of the faculty members, a man called Kamen Ganchev, who'd been Bulgaria's shot put, what do you call that? Yeah, thank you. Winner in 1938. And had also been a diplomat. He was married to a lady called Nelly Karova, who was sort of star of the Sofia Opera. They had a chance to leave Bulgaria in 1958, and they came out with their son. And he started teaching European history and Russian literature at Hopkins. And his wife taught voice lessons, so I used to play for her lessons quite a bit. And I think I made $3 an hour, you know, and if I did 4 or 5 of those a week, that meant I could buy a whole opera box set every weekend. This is really a big deal. She happened to be a very good singer and was an excellent teacher, so I learned a lot from her as well. There was also another teacher in town called Maestro Francesco Riggio, who ran the Connecticut Opera Theater, experimental opera. And twice a year, he and his wife, who was a good coach, put on operas at the Schubert Theater up in New Haven. And they had quite a few good students. One of them was Peggy Mondo, good New Haven girl, large girl, full of life, whom you may remember singing along with Buddy Hackett in the music band in the movie. There was also this girl called June Anderson, who came from Wallingford, Connecticut. So they paired us together. So June and I used to make a lot of our extra pocket money, at least once a week, sometimes twice. Hadassah, the Lions Club, whatever, you know, you do the Carnival of Venice, and I don't know, Regnava del Silenzio. We got a meal out of it. We got $15, so we were happy doing that. So that's how all of that slowly got going. My first real job was with the New Haven Opera Society, which was run by the fabulous Herta Glatz. She fired me after the second day, and she was absolutely right. I was terrible. I was just terrible. But she just encouraged me to keep going. So that was the New Haven.
So much for that career in opera,
So
right?
much for that career in opera, yeah.
So it begs the question, who was the first singer that you had to prompt, who forgot their words?
June. I mean, it's nothing against June. It's nothing against anyone. Everyone forgets words.
Right.
They forget where they're coming in, but they mostly forget words. And it's a big part of being an accompanist. It's a big part of coaching. And it sure as hell is a big part of being part of a performance in a major opera house. As I said to Tyson the other day, I think the best description I've ever heard of what a prompter does is we are the safety net. That was Maestro Levine's term for it. And if a conductor or a director, more and more nowadays, doesn't see the need for a safety net, they're hanging themselves out to dry pretty bad. We are very useful in the theater.
Yes, absolutely. So you've had a number of different types of careers, actually.
Yes.
If you were to say, give us an idea of what kind of skills or training, because I don't believe, to my recollection, University of Arizona does not have an online course for prompting. Give us an idea of what a person would need to learn in order to just prompt opera.
Well, I've tried at a couple of big schools to encourage them to have a training program for prompters. I mean, I think it's still vital, it's still valid, but they just don't seem to get it, and that's a shame. So most of us have had to pick it up as we went along. A couple of my really esteemed colleagues studied with the great Ricci in Rome, for example. I did it pretty much by observing a little bit and then just inventing as I go along. And I think most of us have developed our own styles over the years. If we're not comfortable in our skin and in the box, you're not going to be of much help to whomever's on the stage, or the conductor 30 feet behind you outside of the box conducting, who thinks he's got everything under control, but very often doesn't quite.
I can vouch for that, actually.
Obviously, languages are very important. I was quite lucky. I grew up in a multilingual household. I was born in 1952. My mother's father spoke Plattdeutsch. My mother spoke English and a little Plattdeutsch. My father spoke American English and Yiddish. There was a Dutch nanny in the house, so she spoke to me in Dutch. So all of this, I mean, sort of similar languages, but they were all going at the same time in this little brain. I grew up in New Haven at a time when there were still wonderful little neighborhoods. Are any of you here from New Haven, or do you know the city at all? Okay, well, there's a Worcester Square area, which is very Italian. It's still glorious. I grew up in a part of town about a half a mile away called Goatville, because even in 1952, the German immigrants still had goats and chickens, and they still had their own vineyards, small. They made their own wine in the basement. By the time I came along, there was still some Italian. There were a few Italian families and a couple of Polish. And everybody got along, and everybody spoke their own language because they were grandparents. So I grew up hearing Italian day in and day out, you know. I didn't understand the grammar, but I picked up the words and the phrasing. When I went off to Hopkins as a 13-year-old, the first thing we had to do was study Latin. Well, that was a good idea, except I had no idea about grammar. I hadn't been taught it, and I failed badly. And at the end of the first year, the Latin teacher told my poor parents that their son seemed to show no aptitude for languages at all. And that, given the seriousness of the case, do you remember this attitude from the 50s? He should probably study Spanish because it was easier than the other languages. I mean, wherever that came from in American education, I'll never know, but they did think that. Eventually, I became fluent. I took a master's degree in Italian. I lived in France for 6 years. German we spoke already. I also speak Swedish and Dutch, rather bad Russian. And I was able to meet that Latin teacher a few years ago at the Met. He came in, and we were in the Belmar room, and he said, "Hello, Craig, do you remember?" I said, "How could you forget me? You terrorized me, and you terrorized my parents." And I proceeded to speak to him in all the languages I spoke. And he just stood there and said, "Forgive me." And we were friends again.
So
languages
above all. So let's sort of start with something that's smaller and then go to something that's larger.
Okay.
How about we start with recital repertoire, because you're dealing with many languages usually, and sometimes the singers know some languages, sometimes they don't, it's a very long program usually, hour and 15 minutes or hour and a half or so, of different types of styles too, and it's very, as somebody who's played a lot of recitals, it becomes very apparent when a singer is going to go up on their words. They take a breath and they hold it for a second, and then you know exactly what's not going to happen then, and then you have to throw them a word. So maybe you could sort of talk about like how you learned about that through recitals, and even talk about a little bit about some of your recital partners. Some of them are Wagnerians, by the way, if you didn't know that already.
I don't know, throwing a singer a word just always seems second nature. I don't know how or why.
I think that's the case for many of us, actually.
You feel the same thing. You know, you're there, you're in the heat of the moment, heat of the battle, and you know that your partner's in trouble. So, of course, you're going to give them a word. Sometimes it comes out a little bit louder than you mean to, but, too bad, it keeps us going.
The intention becomes angry sometimes.
Yeah. One of my favorite stories was I was in Berlin about 20 years ago with Ben Hebner. We were on a big European tour. And one of the encores was always, "Dein ist mein ganzes Herz." And Ben had a way of doing it. The first verse was sung in German, B section in German, and then whatever country we were in, he would sing the reprise of the melody in the language of the country. So if we were in Quebec, of course, he would sing, whatever it was. You are my heart alone. In Sweden, Norway, it was Anyway, so there we are in Berlin, and we're in the small hall of the Philharmonie. And I started to play da, ya, da, da, and I thought, well, I wonder what he's going to do tonight. I hope he remembers to stay in German. And clearly it hit him at the same moment. And I could see this panic on his face. And I da, da, dee, da, 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 and he sang, die, and dried up. And he looked at me, and the whole audience yelled out, "Ist mein ganzes Herz!" We started again. It was fine.
Those things happen in performances.
Oh, they do. Some of you who are of my age or older may remember a recital with Birgit Nilsson, with Wusman at the piano. It must have been about 68, because she was singing Tosca in the Schenk production back then. And one of the encores was Visidarte. So she was doing it twice a week already. And that sound is just pouring out. And John, of course, is sounding like the New York Philharmonic at the piano. And she sang, "Didi gioielli." It stopped. She looked at John and she said, "What? What are the words?" He said, "Della Madonna, al manto." I said, "Oh." "Didi gioielli della." And she tried up a second time. So now she makes a thing of it. And she sweeps around the piano and she goes to John, and there's lots of. Goes back to the Duke of the piano. "Didi gioielli," and someone in the audience yells out, "Della Madonna al manto." She says, "Della Madonna al manto," e "Didi gioielli." And to the end of the aria, different people in the audience sang out the text, prompting it. And at the very end of it, she went all the way down on her knees to the audience.
And then a prompter was born right there in that very moment, or many of them, Why don't we just show them a little bit of what a prompter does? And we're going to use, I think, probably a little bit of Du bist der Lenz, which you all should probably know. And if you don't, join the Wagner Society. So it's being in the moment, right?
Boy, is it ever being in the moment.
And so there are many things that can happen during a performance, and we'll get into some of those later. But it might be interesting just sort of to hear what goes on and what you don't hear from the audience. It's really kind of distracting in the very beginning, but you eventually get the hang of it. So we're just going to do it straight on through. So you get this.
Okay, let's do a little bit of that. I'm not sure I can remember all the way through without a
Maybe
score.
I'll prompt you.
You prompt me too.
So we get da dum ba da 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 dee da 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 dee.
Yeah, okay, so I'm telling the singer to wait.
Okay.
Remind me to tell another story about this, but that'll come later.
So da dum ba da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da. Yeah, that's kind of it. That's kind of what you hear. Now we're going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to put the retard just before the
Very
new
good,
tempo.
which is stylistically correct, but not many conductors do it anymore.
Yeah. So dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 da. Du bist der Lenz, nachdem ich verlangte im frostigen Wintersfrist. 1, 2. That's it. That's essentially what he has to do. So it's constantly being ahead of whatever is happening and following what the conductor is doing, following what the singer is doing. Also, you can be very helpful when it comes to staging, and this is where we don't so much have it here in the States. I think if here in the States we have about 123 opera companies, and really only the Met Chicago, San Francisco have a dedicated prompter. Over in Europe, almost every company has a prompter because they have much longer seasons. They have seasons that include many, many operas, and sometimes you have singers jumping in from one place to the next. And again, it's very helpful to have that safety net.
Absolutely. I mean, Maestro Levine would not conduct a performance without one. We used to use them discreetly at Glyndebourne. There's a place in the new theater for it, but I go back 45 years to Glyndebourne when it was the little 800-seat house. And we could put in a little box from time to time. The old, I'm attached to Mariinsky. The old theater, the original theater, still has a prompt box. The new one did not have it, which means that some of the music staff have to stand in the wings, which are very far apart. And those poor old Russian ladies are out there just screaming their guts out, trying to make contact with the singers. It's really quite amusing. And very often you'll just see even the biggest of Mariinsky stars singing and go, and turn back and sing again.
That serves to another question, actually. You know, where does a prompter live in rehearsal and also in performances? Because you mentioned the Mariinsky, which, you know, we've talked about in the past, they're in the wings. So what is that difference, and how does that affect what you do as a job?
Ideally, in a rehearsal room, there is a table like this where the multifold members of the production team are sitting. Then to the side of it comes the small music staff, made up of a diction coach, a pianist, and the prompter. Usually the prompter sits right immediately to the left of the conductor. So we're always in contact with each other. It's not as ideal as being in the prompt box because you're off center, but you're about as close as you can get at that point. In early rehearsals, you just have to speak up. I mean, we make a lot of noise. That took me a lot of getting used to. That, you know, some people are singing, great people are singing, and you're sitting there going, cinque, dieci. You know, you don't whisper in the early stages of the rehearsal. As the rehearsals progress, then of course you can start to tone it down. Then comes the drama of moving onto the stage, where the acoustics change completely already. And then you have to develop a whole new sound world of what you're going to use on the stage.
And so I'm sure this changes per production, actually. But what do you know about what the limits are? Like, sometimes they're right by the prompter's box, and yet they can be pretty far upstage and still hear, and yet the same. You know where I'm going with this. Go ahead.
I was prompting a series of Carmen at the Met. It's been around 88 or 89. I think there were 12 performances, maybe more, and it was a revolving door. Everyone in the world who could sing any of the roles in Carmen, do you remember that? Came in and sang one or two performances. Cheryl Studer made her Met debut as Michaela. Alicia Naffé, Marilyn Horne, Victoria Vergara. I mean, it was just incredible. Placido was conducting. Gary Lake sang a few of the tenors. Oh, come on, what was his name, Craig? Get it together.
Which opera? Which opera?
No. Great Italian tenor, married to Miette Sigale.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you're talking about.
He sang 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Jean-Philippe Lafont sang, he made his Met debut and farewell in that run.
As sometimes happens.
Yeah, it sometimes happens. He was very good, but you could never find him on the stage where he was supposed to be. And he came running down the staircase, jumped up on the table, which he was not supposed to do, and continued to run off the table and fell flat on his face. This was his Met debut. He stood up, sang very well. During the interlude, he went to one of the poor ballet dancers, grabbed her shawl and went. Stepped on it and fell down a second time. This is twice in less than 4 minutes that the man has fallen down on stage. He's on the floor in front of the prompt box and he looks at me and says in French, "Did you see that? I almost fell down." J'ai failli tomber. I said, failli tomber, tu es par terre, you're on the ground. What are you talking about? Stand up and sing. You know, so these sort of things happen all the time. At the last performance, he decided he was going to risk jumping on the table again. And he did. He jumped up and he stayed there. And it was great. He forgot to throw the chalice. And as he was about to jump off the table, he decided to throw it while nobody was expecting it. And the chalice went up in the air like this and came down in a Gothic arch, hit one of the dancers on the head. I have never heard the noise doink before, but the chalice on the woman's head went doink. She dropped to her knees. I looked up, and Marilyn was sitting on the stage with her back to the audience going. He was in that same run of productions. Mirella Fredi came and sang two Michaelis. I don't know why, I guess she was in town. And she came running out for her first entrance, and she runs straight to the prompt box. Of course, everyone's going, all the noises carrying on. And she looks down and says, Ciao, Craigie, io sto qui. I'm staying here. And every time she walked on stage that night, she came right down to the prompt box. When they pulled her out of the cave in the third act, she broke loose and ran down to the prompt box. She wasn't taking any chances, you know. She was stepping into the production. There it was.
This is also, it also speaks, I think, though, to how much of the staging you have to know.
Yeah.
And if you are, I mean, generally, I mean, you have to prompt the chorus, but that's not as big of a job as prompting soloists or ensembles, for instance.
That's a whole other story. Mm-hmm. There are certain chorus masters who say, don't bother the chorus. The chorus comes to me and says, please, we need your cues. Don't care what he says, we need you. So it's always a delicate balance there. But yeah, you need to know the staging, because things fall on stage as well. And very often an artist will not see that a plate or a cup has fallen, or that the donkey has relieved himself in the middle of the stage, you know, and it happens.
Or a cover goes on and they're not sure really where to go and there's no one to lead them, and so
you have to have that. But I should have said earlier, developing a trusting relationship with every artist who's singing is the most important thing you can do. There are some people you can't please to save your life. Fine. Most of them are so grateful that you're there. Someone like Renata Scotto would not even take a breath without seeing the prompter go. Elisabeth Söderström would, at the beginning of a rehearsal period, say, okay, this is where I always go wrong. Here. I think I'm okay. Keep an eye on me, but those places, be sure you're watching me. You know, she made my life a lot easier doing that. You have to let them know that you're really there for them. I helped a couple of the Met recordings. I worked on a couple of the Met recordings with Pavarotti, who was terribly nervous, very nervous. And he had a hair trigger reaction to this. So even if I were only doing this, and this happened also at Covent Garden with a colleague of mine, if you went like this, he would start to sing. I said, no, Luciano, per favore, aspetti, ti faccio segno. Respirazione, andiamo insieme. Ah, sì. Next time, same thing. The poor guy was so nervous all the time that he had trouble, he just couldn't read me. There was a fabulous prompter at the Met called Jane Clivitter, with whom he worked all the time. He adored her. And I think every time Luciano came into the house, I had to put Jane on his production. And that was great. It made everybody happy, you know?
Why don't we talk a little bit about because we kind of got there with recordings and that kind of thing. Differences, and this is something that is now a fact of our life with HD and whatever. How does that affect what a prompter does and how they are able to interact with the stage?
A recording?
Well, no, with the HD.
Oh, a nightmare, a total nightmare. The second opera I prompted at the Met was Fledermaus, which would have been New Year's Eve 1986. And it was stellar cast. Decanoa, Troianos, Blegen, Hagegård, Rendell, and wowza. And it was being televised live. And we had a couple of run-throughs. And I was doing what I normally did in the run of a show. But it was picking up my voice. And men's voices carry better / for the worse on recordings. So I had to rethink everything I was doing in this. And this was a cast which was a little unsure of themselves. Miss Blegen was at the point of her career where she was just slowing down. And she had a health concern, but she was still singing gorgeously, and, was there. But she was nervous. So she was exceptionally demanding. Miss Troianos was a nervous wreck the entire time. And Dame Curie, I'm sorry, it's not a secret, couldn't remember what her phone number would be. It's just what it was. So I had to work extra hard with these singers to do it.
So what kinds of things did you change as a result?
The quality of my voice and many more consonants. So I sort of spoke like an extremely posh Brit speaking in parentheses. That sort of, you see, which I just made me laugh all the time. Okay. But it seemed to get us through. But I remember Otti Schenk was the jailer. And we were listening to a playback of one of the taping sessions, and he looked at me and said, "You have things that nobody knows nothing in this opera house." And I said, "Well, that may be the case partially, but we got to work around this." Mm-hmm. And of course, he had 20 minutes of dialogue, and he would forget. Fair enough. He was doing it in English, which was pretty amazing. I said, "Okay, this is what's going to happen. I'm going to stand there and I will do what I do. And if you see me do this, you give me the words." Well, we had lots of going on during the performances, but that's how we solved that problem.
Mm-hmm. How would be? I'm curious about this. So how would be prompting something like, because as musicians, we have to learn different styles. The two things I was telling Craig earlier, the two things that I have never done, and I've done a lot of things in opera, the two things that I've never done is I've never had to prompt other than just in a rehearsal, the things that I was conducting or playing, and I've never had to run surtitles. So I'm very lucky in that respect. Many people hate those jobs. I probably am not an exception to that. But I think the question is how, if the style of the opera changes, for instance, if you're doing Andrea Chenier as opposed to Parsifal or La Bohème or Marriage of Figaro, is there a different approach that you would use for those different styles or composers?
Oh, absolutely. Particularly the way you breathe with the singer and then carry through the phrasing. Let's see. Let's take Figaro. Aprite un po' quegli occhi, uomini incauti e sciocchi, guardate. Good. Bohème. Ma quando lo sgelo, il primo. See, it's in slightly slower motion. And you make your gestures to hopefully support the singer so that they feel there's someone right there with them. I'm not saying like Janine Rice on that funny Carmen video where she's standing next to just see a Neil going like a dodo bird. I mean, it's not that. You're just there trying to help along. Wagner, obviously, because of the long stretches of text, you just have to really stay there and keep the words going every few measures. It's like a lieder recital. It's like Virgil Thompson used to say, Wagner's nothing more than lieder louder. And he was right. He was right.
So now we're on Wagner again. How about something like Meistersinger, which has those incredibly difficult ensembles? We even talked a bit about Salome, doing Salome at Betankerwood, and that might be something with the
Is that
Jews.
the story?
Yeah.
Okay, 2001, August. The Boston Symphony decided to give a concert performance of Salome with Miss Ford singing her first Salome. Wow, impressive. Semi-stage concert performance. The cast was fantastic. I mean, right down to the nitty-gritty. We had the best singers from Europe and the States. Maestro Ozawa had had a terrible experience in Dresden a few years before recording it, particularly with the ensemble of the Jews, and that's what he was most concerned about. So Tony Fogg, artistic administrator, money was rolling back in those days. My 5 Jews and this Jew were driven up to Tanglewood for 2 days of rehearsal. I said, we're not going to need this. Mark Showalter, Mark Reisinger, Stephen Goldstein. I mean, these are good, solid American boys. So we met. I went through it with him once, and it was damn near perfect. And I said, oh, okay, let's try it again, just for good luck. Went through it, not a mistake. Okay, listen, Mark, maybe the A could be a little tighter, maybe. We made a couple of little good suggestions, but not final. So now it's 11:20 instead of 11. I said, well, I guess we better go have lunch now. We're meeting Maestro at 1 o'clock. He's coming in to hear it. So off we went and had lunch in the nice cantina, came back. Maestro Ozawa arrives, very nervous. How are they? I said, they're good, Maestro. You're going to like this. Oh. We started, and it's perfect. And he looks at me. He said, I told you, they were perfect. Let's do it again. I said, yeah, let's do it again. That's a good idea. We did it again. He looks at me and says, okay, go home. So they had brought these 5 guys up, paid for the hotel, the cars, the whole thing. These guys were ready to go in 35 minutes, So that's how that worked. 2 weeks later, we all go back up to Tanglewood, and we have a week of rehearsals. It was hard to pull off. Corey, were you there at that before? Did you go to that one? Okay. It was a great idea, but what they did was to create a semi-rake stage up on risers, almost in the middle of and the back of the orchestra. That's where the singers were. You could see them very well, but they couldn't see the maestro. And Seiji, as usual, wanted to conduct without a score. And we were all just going, oh, this can't happen, this can't happen. So we went and had a sake. I think it was on Wednesday night. Concert was Saturday. I said, Maestro, please, you have to use the score. It's too dangerous. And eventually he saw the point. To his credit, chapeau. So he said, yes, I'll use it. And he started using the score. On Thursday, Ms. Ford says, I can't do this without a prompter. Now, they had their scores. There were scores discreetly put on stage. But she was just too nervous. And I didn't blame her, not 1 second. But they were all frightened. We also had the incredible team of not Jane Shawless, but Jane Henschel and Ken Riegel, who would stand there and look at each other and go, and make these faces. And everyone on stage was just dying with laughter. And they would say, tell them not to do that. You said, you tell them not to do that. They're brilliant in this show. So everyone was afraid of cracking up at the same time. There's all this going on.
That's when opera used to be fun.
So on Thursday afternoon, they put me in the middle of the woodwinds, right up next to the break stage. So, of course, the guys in the orchestra are furious. No, this is not going to work. There's no way this is going to work. So we talk about it and said, okay, look, for Saturday, you build a little stage right next to Maestro on his right side. You put a screen around me so no one will see me. I'll be there. They can see me 25 feet away. This is going to work beautifully. I know what I'm doing. 20 minutes to 8, no screen. 7:45, no screen. Now, I used to weigh a lot more than I do now, and I was in a white silk jacket, so I sort of looked like, Orca sitting there on stage. I hear someone say, what the hell's Rutenberg doing up there on stage? So I go off, and in those days, there was this guy called Big Pete, who was the head stage guy. I said, Pete, where's my screen? Oh, Maestro, I'm so sorry, we don't have time to build it. You're gonna have to be without the screen. I said, but I gotta look like some person with a weird disease who wandered on stage. This isn't right. He said, we can't do it, Maestro. Just get used to it. I said, okay, there we are. So I slink back out on the stage and I sit down. A couple of bad people, hey, Rutenberg, what you doing? I said, shh, fine. The score is on the platform, on the podium, I mean. Maestro comes out, takes his bow, he looks down, he looks at me, I said, and he goes, oh shit, forget glasses. He forgot his glasses, so he couldn't read the score after all of that. So he had to do it by memory after all. I mean, it was the most terrifying night, just terrifying. Turned out to be a fabulous performance, and I'm sorry that Debbie never sang more Salomés after that, because it was just so vocally glorious. And she sang beautiful German. It was a hot show. Anyway, the lights all go out. Seiji jumps off the platform, and he jumps onto me like this. And he says, I don't know how we do, but great. And Juice perfect. And the lights go up. And there he is, Maestro Ozawa, hanging on to me like he's inviting me out for a drink after the show. And I'm all just sort of together like this. That was Salome at Tanglewood.
Wow. I'm curious if you have any other memorable moments. I'm sure you have a lot of them that you could share. Any of the things that kind of come to mind as the greatest performance that you saw or prompted or played for, or perhaps, I mean, you do everything. You played recitatives, you do pretty much everything. We talked about Hoffmann, actually.
Yeah, Hoffmann, I'll tell Hoffmann after.
That goes
in a different
category.
Yeah, there was a Saturday afternoon cosy with Carol Van Ness that I was playing harpsichord. It was simply one of the most beautiful things I've ever been part of. It was just phenomenal. That will always stay in my memory. The greatest opera production of all time remains for me Wieland Wagner's Tristan in the mid-60s at Bayreuth. That set the standard for me flat out. Musically, visually, texturally, dramatically, vocally, and it's been a long time, but nothing has ever been able to match up to that again. And I don't think anything should, because it was so great. A couple of productions of Jenhofer, both with Anya Silja, talking about Bayreuth. We had a magnificent production back in the late 80s at Kleinborn, still the old theater, with Roberta Alexander and Anya, Philip Langridge, Mark Baker, and the best of the Kleinborn chorus doing the small roles. Andrew Davis at his absolute peak. I remember, I wasn't on the production, but I snuck into a rehearsal one afternoon. And in the moment between Kostelnička being taken off and the crowd running out, the town ruffians trashed the house. That was the production of Nick Leenhoff. Brilliant. It's not in the score, but it works. So as that's big, all of those C major arpeggios grow and grow. Suddenly these guys, 20 guys, start to scream. They turn over the furniture, they smash the chairs, they break a window, they break into the cupboard, they're throwing all the linen about. And yeah, I know. That's what happened. And when finally the big C major resolves, the stage is empty except for the two singers. And then they come back in B flat. Well, I was going out to dinner with a friend that night. We were driving into Brighton, and I remember sobbing in the car all the way from Glyndebourne to Brighton. I saw every performance that summer. I had almost the same response every night. There was a revival of Jennifer at the Met with Carita and Anya again, and it was Maestro Jirgi's farewell. It was just, he got sick right after that and died. And it was a rocking, spoken hot run of shows, but there was the matinee. And I was standing in the wings, and I've known Anya since I was 13 years old. And she just walked out to me, and we burst into tears, and she just said to me, "Schöner gibt's nicht." You know, there's nothing more beautiful. So those really stick out. Also the Midsummer Night's Dream from Glyndebourne, Peter Hall production, which is still around. It's 40 years old now. Some young whippersnapper kid in England a couple of years ago said to me, "We're going to do this production. It's very famous. Have you heard of it?" I said, "Heard of it? I was one of the original coaches. Yes, I know all about it." There's a video of it. It's not nearly as good as watching it at the house, but if you ever get to see it, it's brilliant. Hoffman?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I put a pin in something else that we're going to visit here in a minute. But.
Okay. I loved coaching the Tales of Hoffman, particularly in the old production, the Met. This was 86. We took it to Japan. We revived it a lot. Maestro Charles Dutoit was making, I think, his house debut. He was either Faust or Hoffman. I don't remember which. I think it was Hoffman. Anyway, you know, he's a great conductor, and he's a wild, wild guy. But he didn't have much experience in the pit, and for Charlie to hold the orchestra and the stage together was a big deal. So I really earned my extra, what was it, $45 or $50 a night for prompting a show. Oh yeah, it was nothing. We got paid peanuts for doing that. So. Weeknight performance. You just have a feeling it's going to be a weird night, and it was. It was Chekhov, it was Jimmy Morris, Susan, the Olympia was Gwen Bradley, but she got sick and she canceled. And I can't remember the name of the much shorter soprano who went in for her that night. She was very good. But Spallanzani and the crowd, it was Andrea Velas, who you may remember is the Met's great character tenor, and Tony Latura. So at the end of the aria, they had said to her before, when you finish the aria, stand there. We know how to pick you up. We will not drop you. We know what to do. Go with us. If you move, we will drop you. We can promise it. And she said, "Don't worry, I won't do anything." She stood there. She got her well-deserved applause. The two guys go over, you know, looking like Cheech and Chong, go over, pick her up, and she moves, and they drop her. She falls in such a way, excuse me, I hope I don't offend too many people here, but Andrea Velas's right hand went up her skirt, like that. Andrea looks at me in the prompt box and goes, Like, what am I doing here tonight? They got her straightened out. Finally picked her up. I called a friend in Jersey and said, this is going to be a bad night, I can tell already. He said, can't get any worse, don't worry. Fine. Tatiana Trianos and Miss Quitmeyer come in, and they're singing the most glorious Belle Nuit. There's a projection, a foggy projection of Venice behind them. The dude up in the lighting booth hits the camera as he's leaving the booth. And Venice does this. So it's on this sort of an angle with a white background. They're trying to find the guy. They can't find him. And Venice is very slowly going.
It's Pisa all of a sudden.
Slowly falling back into his place. Audience is laughing. But it gets much worse. Third act. Roberta Alexander. Everyone's just at the top of their game. They're singing so beautifully. If you remember the production, there were a lot of lighting effects and fire and stuff going on. Okay. Roberta Alexander is singing Je jurais d'être à lui, mon bien-aimé m'attend, bah, bah. And she's looking at me. And Maestro Dutoit jumped about 5 bars and brought the orchestra in. And in my attempt to calm her down, I had a large cup of ice water sitting next to me. And I went, and the ice water hit me in the forehead and poured down the front of me. So this poor woman who needs all the love and attention she can get on the stage is now looking at her best friend of the moment in the audience with ice in his glasses, on his sweater, sopping wet. So she's trying not to laugh. Okay. About 30 seconds before Mr. Morris is supposed to make his entrance through the fireplace, it is scheduled that a flame goes out, and he walks on. Quels amours sont les vôtres? Gwyneth Bean. Do you remember Gwyneth Bean, the fabulous contralto? Big lady, big lady. She's behind the portrait. The portrait had been made for Jean Craft, who was like this. So, of course, when the light would come on, the audience would always burst out laughing because she would just go like this, and then the stories would come forth. Fine. So she's preset behind there. I'm still trying to get ice off of me. A good minute before the fire cue, it goes off, and it goes up really high, really, really high, like in front of Gwen's face. And I kid you not, what you hear from behind the portrait is, holy shit. From the fireplace, I hear Jim Morrissey say, I'm not going through that fireplace. I'm going to walk around the corner. And he did. He just walked around, and he walked on like a stage manager and sang divinely. I mean, the whole show was like that. It was unbelievable, one thing after another. But there are great nights like that, and you never forget them.
Yeah. Even the bad ones are great sometimes.
Yeah. And then there are the lovely, lovely nights when someone like an Elizabeth Soderstrom, when she goes out for her bow, will kneel in front of the prompt box and thank the prompter. Oh, yeah. You know, you don't get that very often. Yeah.
Special nights. What I wanted to put a pin in and go back to, we mentioned Bayreuth, and this will be the last thing that we get to talk about this evening. I'd like you to tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Wagner family.
Okay. It's very personal. It's very private. But at a very young age, at 13, I knew that there had been some vague connection with the family. If you know Brigitte Hamann's very good book, it's full of mistakes, but it's still an excellent book, factual mistakes. She talks about Dr. Fritz Rutenberg, who was a doctor in Bayreuth along with the Wagner family doctor. I don't know if it's in the English edition or not. It's in the German edition. And Fritz Rutenberg was a second cousin of my father's. After Kristallnacht, she was able to get him out of Dachau so that he could come to the States. She saved him. So there was always this connection. There was a lady up in New Haven called Helen Craybill. She was a very good woman. She was a woman frustrated in her talents. She wanted to be a stage director. She used to attend the Bayreuth Festival masterclasses that Friedeland ran back in the 60s. And she introduced Friedeland to the family, and Friedeland saw this very nerdy kid, but who had an interest in opera and clearly knew something. So she offered kindly, if my parents had the money for it, to show me around Germany and Europe when it was possible. And that's how it all started. Through that, as you all know, if you're dedicated Wagnerians, there were 4 grandchildren, Wieland, Friedeland, Wolf, and Verena. Verena had 5 kids who were a little older than me or my age. And some of us became very, very fast friends in our teen years. And I had the privilege of hanging out at the family house on Bodensee outside of Übelingen. And as the years went on, the affection and respect and relationship between Verena and me became truly one of the 3 most rewarding relationships of my adult life. I've never known a woman who continued to grow, analyze, think, and make very brave statements at such a late stage in life. She was truly extraordinary. One day, we used to go into town a lot for lunch. When I was teaching a lot in Russia, I would always stop through Zurich because for some reason, you could never fly from New York to St. Petersburg direct. You had to go somewhere else. So go to Zurich, get in a car, drive around the lake, 50 minutes later, you're there. And we used to do lunch quite often in town. Just the 2 of us. At the house, her daughters were there, but it was just the 2 of us at lunch. And one day she said, someone wants to meet you. I said, okay, who? She said, you'll see. Does anyone know Übelingen? Have you been to this little town, 12th century town? Just winding hills and streets. So we're going up the streets, and there's a door. And on a very small shield, a sign, middle sign, it says Jüdische Gemeinde Konstanz. The Konstanz Circle, Jewish Community Center. A nice Rebbe comes to the door, strong American accent. Guten Tag. Herr Rebbe, ich bin die Frau Laferetz Wagner. Ach ja, Sie haben angerufen, you called, ja. Und ist das Herr Rutenberg? Yeah, this is Rutenberg. He says, come on in. So she looks at him and she asks in German, may I come in? You know the story. And he goes, of course I know the story. Everyone's welcome here. Won't you please both come in? That's who Verena Wagner was. Another time we were walking along the lake. We'd had a very funny conversation about her father's homosexuality during breakfast. No holds barred with Verena. That's where it was. And we're out walking, it's a beautiful sun. She's got her arm about me. Suddenly she looks at me, she says, in spite of it all, would have made a very good couple, don't you think? So that was the relationship. I learned so much as a teenager from Friedeland. Her sister Verena said, Friedeland was the genius of my generation. It wasn't Wieland. Wieland knew a lot, but Friedland was the genius. She just didn't have the organizational skills. And she had their mother's sense of justice and fighting. That was Friedland's downfall. Verena always put herself down. She was a brilliant woman. She knew so much, particularly from the visual side of things. And even in the last couple of years of her life, I would say, well, do you remember when Elmendorf was conducting Götterdämmerung? And she said, yeah, this didn't go so well. And she'd hum the measures. She could still draw that out of the past in her very old age. When the Not Very Nice People were redesigning and putting Wagner together again the last time, she said, I'd like to be of help. She said, well, what do you want? She said, well, I remember the darkness of the color. The violet was not that color. And they said, well, Madame Lafrance must have an extraordinary memory to recall the colors of the house she grew up in. She said, listen, I grew up in the house. This was my room. I know what was what. They weren't so nice to her within the family, except for Friedland. But these were two extraordinary women, and they changed the direction of my life in ways that I never could have expected, being this little kid growing up on a small street across from a factory in New Haven, Connecticut. And I'm still in touch with the kids today, and it's a great, great privilege.
New Haven, Connecticut is where we started, and I think that's where we'll end today. Craig, thank you so much. You know, I knew this would be he would have to do the heavy lifting because he's such a good storyteller, and all I had to do was push the right buttons at the right time.
Thank you very much.